if we're talking the behind the scenes part, I've got some great pictures of you that I should share when I would be like driving around and to see like you and Alec and Jim literally tucked away, hidden in the weeds or hidden behind a sign so that you're not visible to get these shots driving by.
The Last Independent Automaker Podcast was sponsored in part by Visit Detroit, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Motor City's National Heritage Area, and by the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to this project. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Last Independent Automaker Podcast. I'm Joe Ligo, the producer-director of the documentary. And it's funny, when I go places or even just online, people call me an AMC expert. And I always kind of cringe a little bit at that because there's so many people who know more about AMC than I do. I always say, well, I'm just an enthusiast. I'm not an expert. But if there is somebody I would say is a genuine AMC expert, it's my friend Josh Greenplate. You've been playing with AMCs probably since the day you were born, right?
Not too far off, yeah. I was 10 or 11 when we started restoring my dad's first Javelin.
Josh is one of those people that whenever I have a problem with my ambassador, I call him. We actually drove to Kenosha this summer, and it was a mad dash the month before we left for the Kenosha show to get the AC in my car fixed. And thank you to Josh. For the first time in 8 years since I bought it, it has working AC. So you did most of the work, right?
I don't know if I did most of the work, but it was worth the effort. It made the drive so much nicer having AC there and back.
But enough about our car problems. We could make a whole podcast out of that. Let's talk about other people's cars. So, Josh, do you remember, can't remember if it was 2023, I reached out to you and said, can you come over to my house for dinner tonight? And we're going to talk. I need your help finding people who have AMCs that we can film for the documentary.
Yep, I do. I do remember. I think that's actually the first time I was over at your house.
And so the reason why I asked Josh this is because, you've been involved with the clubs longer than me. And you understood from the get-go that the types of vehicles we were looking to film, either restored to original or, unrestored cars that didn't have aftermarket wheels and didn't have aftermarket accessories, didn't have stripe kits and, hopped up suspension. We were looking for as close to stock as possible throughout the history of American motors. And those cars can be tricky to find, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're looking for a specific single model year, single model that's all stock in a condition that was good enough for the documentary, that's not necessarily easy to find. A lot of the cars that kind of made AMC and made AMC profitable and successful, they're not the cars that people tended to keep. The Gremlins and Hornets and basic Americans, that was AMC's bread and butter, but those were also the cars that were driven, ran hard, worn out, thrown away, not kept. And a lot of the ones that did survive, particularly Gremlins, they survived because they were turned into race cars early on or something along those lines. And so they're still here, but they're nowhere near stock and not the right vehicles for the documentary. So it did take a little bit of work to put together the list of people that owned the cars. And then I'm sure you put plenty of work into tracking them down, getting their permission, and then going actually to film them. I know that was a big undertaking.
We made a spreadsheet of who we knew that was within a day's driving distance because, I wasn't going to go to California. I wasn't going to go to Arizona. Who we knew within a day's driving distance who had, a 57 Rambler or, a 65 Marlin or, a Hornet and Gremlin, like the Hornet and Gremlin were your family's cars, and tried to make this list of as close to stock as we could get. And that's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you is somebody in the collector community. I mean, what AMCs are the most common? Because those aren't always the ones they built the most of. They're just the ones that survived the most.
Yeah, I mean, you look today at the cars you see out at a show, and it's long been AMXs are high on that list, even though super low production, less than 20,000 total. But from a very young age, those cars were recognized as something a little special. There was a dedicated club for AMX owners when the cars were, barely out of production. So the survival rate and the desirability of AMXs is a little bit of an anomaly. I would guess more than half of all the AMXs built still exist in some form. You look at something like a Gremlin, AMC built all but 700,000 of them. If the survival rate is 10%, I'd be shocked. And it goes back to those reasons, right? The AMX was always a performance car. They was a two-seater. They were always something that people considered special and worth preserving. And so they ended up preserved. not many people looked at a base 70 Gremlin and thought, well, this is a car that I'm going to want to own in 50 years, or someone's going to want to own in 50 years. It was, this is the car that I can afford, and I need to get to work, and I need to get to school, so I'm going to drive this car. So definitely a difference in the trajectory of vehicles' lives like that.
One of the two Gremlins we filmed, because we filmed a Levi's Gremlin, which was in very nice shape. It had been restored. But then we also filmed this Gremlin, which belongs to your dad, which is a 71, correct?
71, yep.
And the cool thing about this car is it is a two-seat Gremlin, which was like a base stripped out. The whole point of this car was that they could get the MSRP, almost as low as a Volkswagen, so they could use that in advertising, right?
I think it was like $17.49 is what they advertised, lowest price car built in America, and they stripped every penny they could out of it. The back window is sealed shut, so you've got all that space, no back seat back there. Spare tire is back there against the back wall of the car, and none of it's really accessible. You've got a bench seat, you've got to fold down and kind of wiggle your way back there to use any of that space. But they succeeded in getting the price way down. It was a great advertising point, and they didn't intend to sell a lot of them. Nobody really, nobody intended to buy a lot of them, but it was something they could advertise to bring people in the showroom and then sell them a 4-seat Gremlin or maybe a Hornet sedan for a little bit more. It's an emblem of the 70s. It's a car that I think is a good looking car. Maybe others disagree, but it's certainly a unique looking car. And I think that's driving a lot of the demand. And again, they build a lot of them. There's a lot of people that have close connections to Gremlins as their first car or their parents' car they rode in or whatever. And there just aren't that many left to go around.
Finding one that was restored or close to original was certainly a challenge for us because people also like to customize these cars, right? I mean, the Gremlin's a car that you express your personality through, either as a collector or somebody back in the day. People like to mess with these.
Yeah, absolutely. Factory V8 option, so it's easy to put whatever engine you want in that engine bay. Small car, they were light, and by the mid 70s, you could buy one that was still in one piece for not much more than scrap value. So a lot of those cars got either AMC V8s or Chevy V8s or whatever the case may be put in over the years, custom paint, customizations, different wheels, all of that. And so all of that contributes to making it hard to find stock ones left today. And fortunately, we knew that one, and that was local at my dad's garage and easy to get a hold of. So that worked out.
We ran into the same problem with Javelins too. It was really hard. I mean, you and I really had to brainstorm to find somebody who had a 68, 69 Javelin that was not modified.
Yeah, and that's kind of the same thing, but muscle cars always tended to attract people that wanted to make them go faster and look better and all of that. So again, by the time these cars were a few years old, not that many of them were left stock, and over the 50 years in between, fewer and fewer probably every year. And now there is some trend to return them back to stock and restore cars back to a concourse condition. But still, the vast majority of AMX's Javelins that are around, they at least have different wheels, sometimes different paints or fabrics, things like that. The things that almost always needed to be replaced anyway. And so while people were doing that over the years, a lot of tendency to upgrade and personalize. And we're not talking Mustangs here where they built, literally 1.5 million in the first year. We're talking Javelin, 50, 60,000 units in its best year, and AMX at a fraction of that. So not many to go around. So your pool of cars to choose from is not big to begin with.
Another challenge we found is that it seems that a lot of the AMC cars people saved are from the late 60s through, everything from Javelins through Eagles. But it seems like some of the Rambler cars, especially the 1950s ones, can be harder to track down. Why is it that 56, 57, 58, 59 Ramblers you maybe don't see as many of?
Yeah, I mean, the extra age doesn't help, but overall, I think a lot of it you can credit to AMC's efforts to try to make more durable and better rust-proof cars as times go on. Those 50s cars have a lot of opportunities for rust. The 63 Classic introduced the Uniside to the industry, where the quarter panel rocker, part of the roof, that's all one large stamping, which is great from a lack of rust standpoint. There's less pieces welded together, less opportunity for rust to start, which is good for durability. But those 50s cars you talk about, there might be 6 or 7 stampings welded together. Each one of those seams is an opportunity for dirt and water to collect and rust to start. That makes a big impact on the durability. And then speed limits went up in the 60s, and that relegated some of those 50s cars to less desirable daily use. I'll say a 196 Rambler with no overdrive isn't really a car you can comfortably run at 65, 70 all day long. And, before the gas crisis, that's what highway speeds had become. So a little bit less utility in those vehicles made them a little less desirable to fix if something went wrong. A lot of reasons those vehicles probably have a little bit lower, I'll say, survival rate than some of the 60s, 70s cars that were more usable for the duration of their life.
And I mean, it just seems that as the car market continues to age, car collectors continue to age, there's just less enthusiasm around 50s cars. I mean, the surviving 50s Ramblers that are around are maybe in private collections or museums or people who aren't on Facebook that we can't track down to interview or to track down to film. Because, I mean, gorgeous examples still exist, but they're not always easy to find. Whereas there's a lot, the AMC community is very active on social media, on Facebook and stuff. So I could put out a call in a Facebook group and say, hey, does anybody have, an Eagle wagon or a Matador coupe? Or I could say, oh, I remember this person posted this picture of their Pacer. I can call them. Whereas maybe the people who own the older AMCs aren't as active on Facebook. So that was a big part of how we track down cars too, is that, you gave me a list of people through the club, and then a lot of those people I reached out to on Facebook and messaged them. The hardest car I had to find the two hardest were a Renault Alliance and a Jeep XJ Cherokee.
For super different reasons.
Yes, that's a really good point. For super different reasons. The Alliance, because, I mean, how many Alliances did American Motors build? Was it close to like 300,000 or something?
350, 400,000 units. They were a pretty successful vehicle for AMC, but the survival rate isn't even close to what Gremlin's survival rate was.
Right. You consider, they made 600,000. Well, let's talk about Eagles. How many Eagles do you think AMC made over the years? What, 100,000, 200,000?
Yeah, it had to be over 100, I would think, because those first few years, really until XJ came out, it was a decent seller, 30, 40,000 units a year, if I remember right. So, yeah, probably 150,000.
We'll say, be generous and say, they sold 250,000 Eagles and, 400,000 Alliances, and you cannot find an Alliance for love nor money. And Eagles are not that hard to find. They're pretty common. You can find them on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. It's not that hard. But Alliances, I think every Alliance got scrapped. I think the repair parts are impossible to find. I think finding a person who will work on them is impossible. And so I think there just must have been a period somewhere around, like, what do you think, like 1995, that every Alliance just got taken to the crusher.
I think a lot of them, even before that. My dad bought an Encore new in 84, I think. And before AMC was even out of business, he needed special tools to repair a transmission, and they weren't available. The dealers didn't have them. So that car ended up getting scrapped when it was, 3 or 4 years old. He replaced it with an Alliance. But that was an issue with the Renault product from day one. AMC dealers were used to working on large rear-wheel drive based 6-cylinder and V8 cars without a lot of technology. And here comes Alliance with a small overhead cam 4-cylinder sitting the wrong direction with fuel injection and a handful of modules on an electric fuel pump. And AMC's ability to train those dealers and get them up to speed to keep those cars running and driving and reliable wasn't great. So those cars were at a disadvantage from day one, and parts availability became an issue pretty early on after Renault left the States. So, this was pre-internet. So when you needed that French fuel injection part, if your Chrysler dealer couldn't source it, what are you going to do? And how do you buy parts from France in 1995 in America? It's not easy.
I cannot see a Chrysler dealer being excited to order you a fuel pump for your Alliance or, whatever. The added challenge for us was that the Alliances that did survive are almost all convertibles, because in 85, they came out with the Alliance convertible, and then they came out with the sporty GTA. But all of those Alliances are the ones that tended to have survived. And we wanted an Alliance that looked the way the Alliance looked when it came out in 1983. Now, granted, we would fudge it a little and use an 84 model if we had to, but that meant we had to have either a 2-door or a 4-door sedan. And I had several people offer me convertibles. And I said, I can't. I need it to be a sedan. And so we tracked down a guy. His name was Lloyd. And so he has Alliances. He has I think he might have an Encore. He has these vans. I think he collects Cherokees. He said, one thing he said, it's surprising how many parts are shared between the Alliance and the XJ, like electronic parts, computer parts.
Chrysler did a big Chryslerifying of the XJ around 93, I think. But prior to that, you can tell that the early XJ is developed by a combination of AMC and Renault engineering, that same Renix fuel injection system, a lot of the same switch gear. The early XJs use that same like swiveling, tilting bucket seat that the Alliance has used for better seat space in the back. So definitely a lot of shared components there.
So finding an Alliance was hard because it's hard to find one that's survived. Finding an XJ was hard because it's impossible to find one that isn't jacked up, it's lifted, it's lowered, it's got big knobby tires, somebody sawzalled the fenders out, it's got mods, it's got a V8, it's got a whatever. Finding an unmodified 1980s XJ was next to impossible.
Yeah, I fully believe that. That's one of those vehicles, it's a great off-road base, solid axles, nice tight packaging, durable design. So a vehicle that kind of begs to be off-roaded, but that doesn't bode well for survival, especially in stock form. And it's that vehicle that every other kid of the 90s had an XJ as their first car, which also isn't great for survival rates.
That makes it really hard for us to find a stock XJ that looks the way an XJ looked in 1984. And so we actually cheated. I think the one we filmed is in 1989. And if you look closely, you might see some Chrysler logos under the hood or something like that. We had to kind of frame the shots a little bit carefully to hide the Chrysler logos. Thankfully, this particular owner near Detroit was willing to meet with us, and we met halfway around Detroit and filmed some stuff. And it turned out great. That particular XJ actually had some really bad clear coat peel on the roof and maybe even a little on the hood. And so we kind of had to like shoot low up at it. We had to get the angle just right so that you couldn't see like the peeling clear coated stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's the challenge of this kind of documentary filmmaking. We knew we didn't want to just use old photographs and old footage. We knew we wanted to go out and film these things, but finding the cars in stock condition is a challenge. And it's nothing against modification. I think you and I both are not, die hard, keep it stock guys. I don't think we're against mods, but when you want to be historically accurate for the sake of the story, you can't be having a car on Krager mags with, a small block Chevy swap in it.
Yep. Yeah, definitely that having the stock cars that look like they came right out of the period that you're talking about definitely, I think, helped the documentary. Not many of my cars are totally stock. So no, like you said, nothing against the modified cars. Happy to see them, happy that they're around and loved. But for what your purposes were for the documentary, going that extra mile, I think was super important. And I think it shows in the quality of the footage.
Well, I appreciate that. And certainly we're thankful for all the awesome owners. I mean, not just you, but, all the folks we list at the end of the episode. Those are the people who contributed their vehicles. And, that's another great thing about the AMC community. I mean, you've been a part of the clubs for longer than me, and you know how great this group of people can be as far as, helping each other out and promoting the cause of AMC cars.
Yeah, it's a tight-knit community, and super passionate about the cars and about the company and the history of the company. So getting people on board once we found the right cars, I don't think was overly difficult, but finding the right cars was definitely a hurdle, and finding the right cars somewhere that was reasonable to film without crisscrossing the country makes it even harder.
Thank you so much, Josh, for joining me. Up next, we're going to talk to Doug Gerhke, who was one of the guys who was one of our best helps as far as like letting us film his cars, because his family has quite the collection. But again, you can see Josh's, I guess both the cars are family cars, but I guess technically they're your dad's cars, the Hornet and the Gremlin we filmed.
Yeah, they're both, my mom can argue with you on the Hornet. That's my mom's car, I think. But yeah, they both live at my parents' house. Yeah.
All right. Well, you can see both of Josh's parents' cars in episode 3 of The Last Independent Automaker. We'll be back with more after this. Hello and welcome back to the Last Independent Automaker podcast, where we take a behind the scenes look at how we made this documentary. And a big part of what made this documentary possible were the incredible people who let us drive their cars, film their cars, and put their cars on screen as we told this story. And you just heard us talk to Josh about the process of tracking down people through the club. One of the people we tracked down was I guess I can call him a friend now. I didn't know him super well when I reached out to him. Is Doug Gerhke, who I reached out to on Facebook originally because I was looking, well, originally just because I was curious about six-cylinder javelins, and Doug happened to have one. But then I realized that Doug had a lot more cars, and when we started hunting for vehicles to film, Doug happened to be that guy. So thanks for joining me as we talk about some AMCs, Doug.
Yeah, glad to be here. This is the whole process has been really, really exciting, and glad to still be a part of it.
So I guess the first question is, how many AMCs does your family own? Because it's kind of a family affair. It's not just you; it's your dad and your sister are in on it too, right?
It is, and my mom as well, and my wife, and our kids. That's a loaded question in the car world because nobody really likes to disclose that answer. So I'll leave it at this. It is more than 20.
We were focused primarily on filming several specific models, and I was trying to go off the top of my head as far as how many we actually filmed, because we filmed some stuff and then didn't use the footage, and then some of the cars
Sure.
we filmed. So I think my last count was close to 8 or 10, because we had a Pacer, the Javelin, the AMX, the pink Rambler. We filmed your Ambassador convertible. I don't know if we ever used that footage. And then we had your Marlin, which was a big car in that too. We had a clip of your Eagle. So I guess that puts us at 7, and I'm sure there's like an 8th one I'm forgetting somewhere.
We also did some quick footage in the 70 Donahue Javelin, and then of course the Rebel as well.
See, even I'm having trouble keeping count. But yes, so, and that was one of the reasons we picked you guys, was because we knew we could find multiple vehicles in one place, rather than driving all over the country to go to different places. And so we spent, I think it was like the better part of a week and a half in Indiana, filming your collection, which is really cool.
It was a lot of fun to have you guys here. I think what I remember most was just the time we spent driving the countryside looking for the right shot. And, you taught me a lot that I had never thought of before about, okay, we don't want this in the background. We do want this in the background. And I thought that was kind of cool because I'd never really thought of that side before. It's not a piece that I've ever had any experience with. So I kind of enjoyed that. And now I even think like, I'll be driving through those areas here locally, and you're like, oh, this would make a great shot because there's nothing in the background, and there's this American flag flying that just creates a perfect shot. So that was a really fun part for me.
Yeah, and I mean, where you live is a beautiful place, but one thing, I'm used to Pennsylvania, where we've got hills and mountains and turns and bridges and curves, and one thing that kind of shocked me was how square everything is. All the
Right.
roads are laid out at 90-degree angles.
Yeah.
And so I think cars tend to look better going around curves because you can see the car change, the viewpoint changes, the car looks different. And so I remember we found like one road that had a curve in it that like went around a pond. And I was like, okay, we have to film on that. That's like the one curve we have.
It gave me a chance to get some exposure to like areas that I've never actually been to before here, just a handful of miles from our house, which was a lot of part of the fun too.
Yeah, and it was really fun. We were lucky we had really good weather. I mean, I've told this story before. The first day we were there was like a tornado warning. But other than
Right.
that, we had pretty good weather most of the week. And one thing that's worth pointing out before we talk about the cars is also your friend who has the vintage gas station that we were able to film some clips at. What a cool place that was.
Very cool. It's become pretty popular to people that are just like passing through and see it and stop and get pictures of their car. People will do senior pictures there. I think there's been like wedding engagement pictures that have happened there.
And one thing that was funny is we filmed your Pacer there because we're talking about how the Pacer didn't get the kind of gas mileage that AMC thought it would. And so that was a great backdrop. And, somebody pointed out it's kind of a 60s gas station and the Pacer's a 70s car, but there were probably a lot of those gas stations still around in the 70s, right?
I would think definitely in a small town too. It wouldn't be typical for that to get replaced, renovated every couple of years like it would be now. So yeah, I thought that it's one of my favorite scenes is when the gas handle goes into the car, like you show you putting into the car. I thought that was probably a pretty period correct type of scene that somebody might have seen years ago.
Our team was very lucky to find that and a lot of other beautiful backdrops. And one thing I want to say is, how did your family get into the hobby of collecting AMCs?
Basically, if you really go back years ago to when my dad was a kid, his father, so it would have been my grandfather, worked for Bud Motor Company, and they were out of like the Gary, Indiana area. They did a lot of steel stamping, and one of their main customers was American Motors or Rambler back in the day. So there was always been a little bit of a connection in that regard, but really the story that I always kind of knew in talking to my dad that kind of started it was when my dad was a kid, maybe 12, 13 years old. The Marlin had just come out, and he and his dad, my grandfather, were car shopping. And the Marlin was sitting there in the showroom, and my dad just fell in love with it as like a 12 or 13-year-old kid, and just like trying to convince his dad that no, the Marlin is a family car. That's what we need. We need a Marlin. It's so cool. And I think ultimately his dad either settled on an Ambassador that time or went back to like a Buick or Cadillac, but then later ended up getting an Ambassador. And then when my dad first got his driver's license, the car he took his driver's test in was an AMC Ambassador, which just kind of brought it all
Nice.
full circle. And so years and years down the road, I think there's always been that connection that my grandfather had just to American Motors and having owned them quite a while. But then I think it really sort of became the hobby or the let's call it the bad habit that it did today. My dad owned a Goodyear tire store for a lot of years, and then when he ultimately just decided to move on to kind of open up his own car dealership, we were in a situation where there were still a lot of these cars around that were just cheap, inexpensive transportation. They were not necessarily considered to be collectible cars yet. So there was just the opportunity to find some of these really cool examples that weren't yet really desirable or really collectible, and just being in a position to say, maybe we ought to hang on to this, or maybe this is one that we want to keep for a while. So a lot of it kind of stemmed from that history that he had with the cars, and just really, I always remember the story of the Marlin, how he just fell in love with it. But then just being in a position where before these cars became really desirable and collectible, the opportunity was there. And then as I got old enough to be a part of it and just kind of grew up going to car shows with him, being a part of it, I always say I was his excuse to be able to buy another car because, oh, this is one that my son might want. Oh, my daughter likes Gremlins. We better get a Gremlin and restore that and have that as part of the fleet. So it's definitely been a family affair. And to this day now, my wife and my kids go with me. They enjoy it's the people as much as anything else, but it's developed into something that I always tell people, I didn't know you could have other hobbies as a kid. I wasn't any good at sports. But turns out I was okay at putting cars together and doing that kind of thing. So that's kind of where the hobby stuck, I guess, and hopefully continue carrying that forward.
That's really funny. I like that. It's cool to hear that your dad kind of got in a little bit on the ground floor of the hobby in that you were right. There was a time period when these cars were not super expensive collectibles. We just saw, I forget what it was, something to make them, went for a crazy amount of money. You see a Rebel machine go for 100 grand, or you see, I mean, even
65 Ambassador convertible, yeah, for six figures for beautiful car.
sold for like $114,000 at Hershey or something. And, there was a time period when these cars were like $2,000 used car lot bargains. Didn't you say your sister's Gremlin, like your dad pulled it out of a field somewhere?
It was sold at an auction here locally, and I think the story was that like when something broke on it, something minor, it was just parked in a field. The car had like 30,000 miles, but back then it was just when it was bought for $2,000 new, there was a point where $100 repair wasn't cost effective. So you park it in the field, and 30 years later, somebody finds it. But that's where the orange Gremlin that was filmed came from, was a local car sold new here, really low mileage car, but something really minor broke on it, and it just got parked in a field because it didn't make sense to put any money into it.
And so, yeah, it's cool. I mean, makes me wish I was, 20 years older and would have been around when these cars were still 2 grand. now seeing that just to get a running driving gremlin is like 12 grand. But I think that's really a neat part about it, is that you really have involved your kids and your wife, and your parents are still involved in the hobby. And I think that's a really cool thing to see.
Yeah, I think when you guys were out here filming, my youngest daughter was like less than a month old, so um, had to kind of thank my wife too to be like, "Hey, I'm gonna be kind of absent for about a week or so here," but so that's pretty cool. That's one of those things that it because it's just part of the family. It's just the way it goes. You don't think anything else of it because that's kind of the way we do things, anyways.
Yes, it very much felt like we were part of your family that week, and we're very
Yeah, you
grateful
were. It was great.
for your family's patience in that we kind of monopolized you and your dad's time for the week in terms of asking to move stuff, asking to drive stuff. Where's the keys to this? Where's the battery charger for that? We felt very privileged to be able to be there during what was obviously a busy time. I think there's not a lot of wives in the world that would be that patient if a
Just a
documentary film crew showed up at your house and asked to film your car collection.
just a regular Tuesday for us, right? I mean, it's just again, it's you talk about it being a family affair. It just is. Everybody, it's not work, right? It's something we enjoy. It's like if families are big into sports or whatever it might be, that's it for us. It's cars and AMC's.
Well, and I have to say, it's really cool to see the sort of eclecticness of your collection. Yeah, you've got the sports cars, but you have some oddball stuff there too. Pacer, some of the Ramblers and stuff. So it's not all just Javelins and AMXs.
Yeah. I think one of the things I've always been kind of attracted to is really base model stuff, just things that years ago we saw everywhere. Now, of course, as a lot of these cars get restored, they all get the big engines, they all get options, they all get all the trim options. It's so hard to find something that's just as delivered, where somebody said, "No, I'm going to save $9 and not get a radio," or "I'm going to save $18 because I don't need drip rail molding." So those are the types of things that disappear because it's really easy now to find all those things, and just suddenly every car's loaded up with all the options. So I really have a soft spot for the really unique optioned cars that were as delivered or as ordered by somebody years ago.
Yeah, it's bizarre to see what options people will check. And I mean, that's one of the things, your AMX has the smallest engine available that year, or you have a 6-cylinder Javelin, which was super rare, or, other things where people will skimp out on the engine, but they'll get air conditioning or they'll get other accessories. And so it's always interesting to see the mix. And that's one thing we don't really see with new cars anymore is dealerships really do not let you do a lot of custom ordering unless it's like a Corvette or something really fancy. But if you're going to your local, Chevy dealer and you're just getting a regular, I guess they don't even have sedans anymore. If you're going to get like just a regular Chevy Trax, they're not going to let you pick weird color combos the same way that you might find a Gremlin that's a weird combination of options.
It's like the thrill of the chase is exciting for us. That's one of the reasons I think the collection has kind of grown to what it is. It's almost as exciting to like find out that this exists and then try to figure out, okay, well, how was it? What's been changed? And let's put it back to the way it would have been ordered someday. That's, I think, is really exciting for us, just to find those obscure pieces of history and then try to kind of preserve them because unfortunately we see all the really high end loaded up stuff that's just beautifully restored and great, and I respect and appreciate all that, but you get more attention with that stuff that are like, really, this car is ordered with all of these manual options, but yet they sprung for AC, like in Indiana too, where it's not desert climate or something. So that's, I think, the piece that really kind of excites us and keeps that thrill of the chase going to find something else.
Your two cars on screen here, the red Javelin and the yellow AMX, both beautifully maintained, either restored by you or restored before you acquired them, little things you've done to kind of customize them and make them your own. And one thing we loved about your collection is that you try to keep things as close to stock as possible. And that was really kind of a goal for our film, is not that I don't have anything against modified cars, but for the
Sure.
purpose of the film, we wanted stuff that was historically as close to original as possible.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
like, I love how both of your Javelin and AMX have the red wall tires on them, which is a
Yep.
really cool touch. And I just thought it was great also to find somebody who had a Javelin and AMX that were both fairly close to stock. It allowed us to do this great shot in the film, which I thought was really important to show the difference between the Javelin and AMX, to have them parked side by side and show how there's a lot of parts commonality in the first half of the car, but then the rear half of the car is unique depending on whether it's the two-seater or the four-seater. And I think that was a really important storytelling element for us to be able to park two cars side by side, show the outlines, and explain to the audience who maybe aren't AMC experts the difference between these cars. And I think that was a really great thing about your collection, is how we were able to tell the story through the vehicles. I remember us having you pull up to the post office multiple times to get that shot of the Pacer in front of the post office.
That's right. Doing the lap every time was great.
Right,
And
having you doing laps around the block.
now I think about that every once in a while as I'm driving by the post office. Or what's been fun about the documentary and seeing it aired is, of course, that scene was in it. And so a couple of like our local car friends that are not necessarily into AMCs are like, I recognize that post office. Like that's something I drive by every day. So that's been fun too, to see a couple of things that people recognize that may not be into the car hobby and understand that, hey, that happened right here in our hometown. Pretty cool piece of the documentary.
Really historical nitpickers will say, oh, well, the logo on the front of the post office is, their modern logo. Back in the 70s, it looked different. But I mean, it was, we were going to go in and ask the post office to change the sign out front. But it does help bring the story to life. And you can imagine, as Jeff Kennedy, the guy in that story says, you can imagine driving a brand new Pacer in 1970, the fall of 74, early 75. And having people wonder, what the heck is this car? And you said the Pacer still gets tons of attention today.
It does, and it's kind of all generations too. It's the older generation that remembers when it was sold new, but then it's kids who have either seen it in like the movie Cars or on a cartoon version that get excited about it. So that's kind of one of those cars that anywhere you go, it's instantly recognizable.
I can't thank you enough for letting us film your collection. Obviously, your dad was amazing, your mom and your wife and your sister. And, like I said, it was a family affair. We got to meet kind of everybody during our time there. And it's really funny. One thing that sticks out to me is you're a fan of NASCAR, as is my co-producer, Jim Needle. And months later, or maybe it's only a couple weeks later after we filmed your collection, you and Jim both texted me like within 5 minutes of each other, because it turns out you both saw each other at Bristol, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we were with, a stadium of 100,000+ people. He happened to be like 6 or 7 rows ahead of me. And I think we both caught each other in passing, and we're just sitting there going, that couldn't be him. There's no way. Not here, not in Bristol, Tennessee. So that was really cool too, is like part of the process. I don't think anticipated is you get, friends across the country for life now and kind of have that connection. So, yeah, the whole being a part of the whole process was a lot of fun. It really was.
It's one of the best parts about the hobby. It's the people, right? It's the friends you make in the club, the family members you meet, and to realize that this really isn't just a hobby for like grumpy old men. It's like there's a lot of fun, friendly, different generational people involved in the hobby. It's a really cool thing.
For sure. Yeah. What I wanted to mention too is I think if we're talking the behind the scenes part, I've got some great pictures of you that I should share when I would be like driving around, and to see like you and Alec and Jim literally tucked away, hidden in the weeds or hidden behind a sign so that you're not visible, to get these shots driving by. So I think that was one of the most fun parts for me too, is to kind of watch, you just see this one perfect shot for maybe 12 seconds in the video, but you don't realize 20 approaches were taken, or 20 approaches that all look the same, but because the light was different, the shadows hit the wrong way. Like that's, I think, what brought a lot of respect for me to see the process of this is, I can pull my cell phone up and get a video and go, oh, it looks great. Well, so much more to it that I had no idea of. So I think it's worth noting the amount of time that goes in to make that a really high quality professional production that for me is just driving up and down the same road 10, 15 times. You don't realize that's all happening behind the scenes. So that was really, really cool for me to see that piece of it, that hopefully everybody can understand and respect how much work goes into that.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That's actually what we're going to talk about on our next podcast, is Jim and I are going to talk about how we filmed all these cars. But that's a great little preview. And yeah, we had some fun times, but you're right. You'll get the perfect shot, and then there'll be a dump truck coming the other way and block the camera.
One of the places that we filmed, has a cruise in monthly, the one golf course. And so I happened to load up my youngest daughter and take the 70 Donahue out to that cruise in. And I was talking to just a guy who happened to be one of the maintenance directors out there. And he was like, do you have other AMCs? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, would you have been driving them last summer out here, just up and down, maybe, 10, 15 times? And I'm like, yeah, kind of a little hesitant. And he's like, we all wondered what was going on. And so I gave him like one of the cards you had given me. And I'm like, well, hey, you're going to really enjoy watching this then, because there's some footage here that's what we were actually filming. But it's kind of cool. A year later, somebody remembered, yeah, there was this yellow AMX and a Rebel machine going up and down. And he's like, I remember you weren't going like fast. So it's not like you were like doing anything you weren't supposed to. He's like, you just don't see that 10, 12 trips happening all at once. So it was kind of cool to like, oh, people in a good way noticed and were excited about what was happening.
Can't thank you enough. This has been super fun. We definitely
Absolutely.
could not have made the documentary without you or without the dozens of other people who supplied vehicles, everything from,
For sure.
Pacers, Gremlins, a Matador Coupe, all the way down to a Renault Alliance. We've been very lucky to have people who've been awesome to supply us with their cars. So I can't thank you or your family enough. You guys are fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for what you do for the hobby and everybody involved. We were honored, and it was a privilege to be a part of it, and now kind of be a part of this family, this connection for years to come.
The last Independent Automaker podcast was sponsored in part by Visit Detroit, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Motor City's National Heritage Area, and by the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to this project. Thank you.